All right. Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at the world of IT recruiting
Okay.
in North America.
Sounds good.
We've got a fantastic report by Locum Integration,
Hmm.
and they've got over a decade of experience in this field.
Wow.
And what we're really trying to do today is kind of just peel back the curtain
Right.
and see how this industry actually works.
Yeah.
What does it mean for companies trying to hire IT professionals?
Hmm.
What does it mean for job seekers like you listening right now who are trying to break into the industry or
Yeah.
level up or just find a new opportunity?
Absolutely.
So I think you're going to be surprised by some of the stuff we find out today.
Yeah, it's a fascinating landscape. And
Yeah.
Lipcom's report really does a great job of sort of shining a light on some of the things that maybe a lot of people just aren't aware of.
Exactly. Like one of the things that I thought was really interesting um, was this idea that, the internet was supposed to make recruiting easier.
No.
In some ways, it did,
Yeah.
but it also created a whole bunch of other
Sure.
problems and challenges.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So, I mean, think about it. Before the internet, recruiting was really localized.
Right.
I mean, do you remember,
Uh-huh.
actually having to drop off your resume
Oh, yeah?
at a physical office?
In person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's hard to imagine now. But, that really meant that the recruiter had to understand the local market.
Mm-hmm.
They charged a hefty fee, of course, sometimes 30, 40, 50%.
Yeah.
But they were doing a lot more legwork to find the right candidates.
Right. And so it makes you wonder, has some of that personal touch
Yeah.
been lost in the digital age?
Potentially.
But then, the internet explodes and all of a sudden, sites like Monster and Dice
Look, let's have a look.
becomes the go-to
Oh, really?
for job seekers and for recruiters. So what was the impact of that?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it made things more efficient, at
Yeah.
least on the surface, right? Anybody could upload their resume, apply for tons of jobs
Right.
with just a couple clicks. But that ease of access also led to just this overwhelming flood of applications.
Oh, wow.
So it became less about quality and more about quantity.
So instead of making things easier, it actually made it
Yes.
harder for companies to find the right
Exactly.
candidates.
Oh, wow. So almost the opposite of what it was supposed to do.
Right.
And then on the flip side, for job seekers, it must have become incredibly frustrating to navigate
Oh, absolutely.
the sea of applications, and often with very little response from companies.
Yeah. You feel like you're just sending your resume out into the void.
It sounds like a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
Companies are overwhelmed, job seekers are left feeling
Yeah.
like their resumes are disappearing into a black hole.
Exactly.
So how did the industry try to solve this problem?
Well, that's where vendor management systems, or VMS, come into play.
Okay.
And they were designed to kind of bring some order to this chaos
Right.
by acting as a middleman between the companies and the staffing agencies. Okay, so let's unpack this for a second, because I've definitely heard of VMS,
Mhm.
but I'm not entirely sure how they work. So what's the benefit for a company using a VMS?
Well, the idea is that they streamline the hiring process.
Okay.
They manage the flow of applications. They track candidates' progress.
Okay.
And often they'll use algorithms to try to match candidates to open positions
Right.
based on, keywords and skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so this can save companies time and resources, especially when they have a lot of open roles.
Okay. But it kind of sounds like VMS might have just traded one set of problems for another.
That's a valid point. Yeah. While VMS can be really helpful in managing that huge volume of applications,
Yeah.
they do come with their own set of challenges.
Okay.
And there's a lot of debate about whether they actually deliver on their promises.
Like, what kinds of challenges are we talking about? I'm guessing this is where things start to get really interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned that there's this debate about whether these VMS systems deliver on their promises. So what are some of these concerns that Locum Integration raises in their report?
Well, one major concern is the potential for bias
Okay.
within these systems.
Hmm.
A lot of VMS platforms use algorithms
Right.
to rank and filter candidates.
Sure.
But those algorithms are often opaque,
Mm.
and they can perpetuate existing biases.
Can you give me an example of how that might play out?
Sure. Imagine a VMS system that prioritizes candidates
Okay.
who have worked at, specific companies
Okay.
or graduated from certain universities.
Yeah.
That might sound reasonable on the surface,
Right.
but it can unintentionally exclude highly qualified candidates
Mm.
from less traditional backgrounds.
So even though these systems are supposed to be objective,
Yeah.
they can actually end up reinforcing the very inequalities they're supposed to address.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox.
And that's not the only concern.
Right. Another issue is the added layer of bureaucracy
Okay.
that VMS systems introduce.
So they're supposed to streamline the hiring process?
Right. In theory, they can sometimes have the opposite effect.
How so?
Well, companies might have to navigate these multiple layers of approval within the VMS platform and communication between the VMS provider and the staffing agencies.
Right.
It can be really slow
Yeah.
and inefficient,
Wow.
and that can lead to significant delays
Mm-hmm.
in the hiring process.
And especially when companies are competing for top talent, I imagine those delays can really cost them.
Absolutely.
Like in terms of lost productivity,
Yeah.
potentially missing out on the best candidates.
It's a huge problem.
And then there's the issue of cost, right?
VMS providers charge fees
Yeah.
for their services, and those fees can be pretty substantial.
Uh-huh.
And this can drive up the overall cost of hiring for companies,
Right.
which might lead them to offer, lower salaries
Yeah.
to candidates to try to compensate.
So it seems like VMS systems, while intending to improve the process, they can actually sometimes exacerbate the issues they are meant to solve.
It's kind of a vicious cycle.
Yeah. But Locum's report doesn't just focus on VMS. They also delve into some of the darker aspects
Right.
of the IT recruiting landscape.
That's right.
Right.
The report sheds light on the prevalence of fraudulent and unethical practices
Okay.
within the industry.
So give me some examples.
Well, on the less severe end, you might see things like recruiters posting fake job ads
Really?
just to harvest resumes
Oh, wow.
and build their databases.
Okay.
They might also engage in bait-and-switch tactics,
Oh.
where they advertise a position with a certain salary range,
Uh-huh.
but then offer candidates a much lower rate
Yeah.
once they've expressed interest.
That's incredibly frustrating as a job seeker. You feel like you're wasting your time and energy.
It is. It's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are even more serious offenses.
Okay.
Some recruiters engage in kickback schemes,
Oh, wow.
accepting payments from certain companies to favor their candidates,
Wow.
even if those candidates aren't the best fit for the role.
That sounds incredibly unethical and potentially illegal.
Yeah, it definitely can be.
It also really undermines the whole purpose of the recruiting process, which is supposed to be about finding the best match between candidates and companies.
Right. It should be about finding the best fit
Right.
for everybody involved.
And then there are cases of outright fraud, where recruiters might misrepresent job openings
Right.
to pressure candidates into signing agreements
Mm.
or even steal their personal information.
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on the challenges of IT recruiting.
It's a complex landscape.
It's one thing to hear about these issues in the abstract, but to know that they're actually happening out there is pretty concerning.
It's definitely something to be aware of.
It seems like the current system is failing both companies and job seekers in many ways.
Yeah, there's definitely room for improvement.
We've talked about the challenges for companies, but I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the human cost
Right.
of all this.
Sure.
How are IT professionals themselves impacted by this often chaotic and opaque recruiting landscape?
It's a great question.
It seems like the IT recruiting landscape can be a difficult one to navigate. So what are some of the specific challenges that IT professionals face when dealing with this system?
I think one of the biggest issues is this feeling of being treated like a commodity rather than an individual.
Mm.
The focus on keywords and algorithms often overshadows the unique skills
Yeah.
and experiences that each candidate brings to the table.
It's like they're being reduced to a set of data points rather than being seen as whole people with careers,
Right. Exactly.
aspirations.
Yeah.
So beyond just feeling like a number in a database, are there any practical implications for IT professionals navigating this system?
Absolutely. One of the most tangible impacts is on wages.
Okay.
With all these layers of fees and markups
Yeah.
from recruiters and VMS providers,
Right.
IT professionals often end up being offered salaries that are below market value.
It sounds like they're losing out financially because of the complexities of the system.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of communication,
Uh-huh.
or rather, the lack thereof.
Right.
It's not uncommon for IT professionals to send out dozens of applications
Yeah.
and receive very few responses, if any at all.
Right.
And so they're just left feeling like they're shouting into a void.
That has to be incredibly demoralizing when you're putting in all that effort to tailor your resume and cover letter to each specific job.
It is, and it can create a sense of powerlessness.
Yeah.
Like they have no control over their own career trajectory.
And it's interesting, you would think that in a field as in demand as IT, professionals would have more leverage,
Right, you would think so.
but it sounds like the system is actually working against them in a lot of ways.
It is in many ways,
Hmm.
and it highlights a fundamental disconnect between the way the recruiting system currently operates
Mm-hmm.
and the reality of the talent market. Companies are desperate for schooled IT professionals,
Yeah, they need these people.
but the process for connecting them is broken.
Yeah, so where do we go from here? Is there any hope for a more ethical and effective IT recruiting system that benefits both companies and job seekers?
I think so. I mean, I'm optimistic.
Okay.
I think we're seeing a growing awareness of these issues,
Yeah.
and there's a push for greater transparency and
Uh-huh.
accountability within the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Job seekers are becoming more savvy about their rights,
Yeah.
and they're demanding better treatment.
Yeah.
And some companies are starting to realize that they need to rethink their whole approach to recruiting
Yeah.
if they want to attract and retain top talent.
So it sounds like a shift is starting to happen, but it's going to take a concerted effort from all stakeholders to really create lasting change.
I agree. It'll require a shift in mindset away from viewing IT professionals as commodities
Mm-hmm.
and towards recognizing them as valuable assets.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the historical evolution of IT recruiting
It's a fascinating history.
to the challenges of the current system and the potential for a more equitable future.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Imagine you had the power to redesign the IT recruiting system from the ground up. What changes would you make? What would an ideal system look like for both companies and job seekers?
That's a great question to consider. It's an opportunity to really envision a system that values skills and experience
Right.
and the human element.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share your ideas and experiences using #IT Recruiting Reimagined. Until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.